September 28, 1972. For a few timeless seconds, an entire country forgot to breathe. From Vancouver to St. John's, factories paused, schools rolled televisions into gymnasiums, and millions of eyes stared at the flickering screens that connected every corner of Canada. On those screens unfolded not just a hockey game, but a national test of spirit. It was the Cold War, and the ice had become a mirror for two worlds. To the Soviets, discipline and collective order were weapons sharper than any stick. To Canadians, hockey was not a system. It was a heartbeat, a child on a frozen pond, a father in the stands, a nation stitched together by frost and dreams. When Team Canada stepped onto the ice against the Soviet Union, they carried more than sticks and jerseys. They carried identity. They carried the hope of a country still defining itself, not through war or empire, but through effort, grit, and grace under pressure. The air was thick with tension and belief. Every pass, every collision felt like a heartbeat of national pride. Behind each face in the crowd was a story. Immigrants who had made Canada home, veterans who had fought for its freedom, children who had only known peace. That day, they were all connected by one simple truth, that a game could carry the weight of a nation's soul. The whistle blew and the puck dropped. History was set in motion. In the early 1970s, the world was split in two. The Cold War was not only a race for weapons or influence, it was a silent contest for the human soul. Every achievement, every headline, carried an invisible flag. And into that world skated the Canadian and Soviet hockey teams, blades cutting across a frozen front line. For Canadians, hockey was not entertainment, it was identity. It lived in the echo of backyard rinks, in fathers flooding driveways under winter moons, in children learning balance on the edges of hope. It was how the nation spoke without words, how it proved that resilience and creativity could coexist. Canada had always seen hockey as its language, rough, fast, and free. The Soviets saw something else. For them, hockey was discipline perfected, the state translated into motion. Their style was orchestral, mathematical, relentless. Their players trained like soldiers, designed to erase individuality in the name of collective victory. When the series was announced, Canada expected to win effortlessly. After all, the NHL was home to the world's best talent. The idea that amateurs from the Soviet bloc could rival professionals seemed laughable, yet beneath the confidence was a deeper fear. What if the world stage revealed that Canada's supremacy, the core of its cultural pride, was fragile? The Summit Series was never just a sporting event. It was the moment when two systems met on neutral ice, one born of order, the other of improvisation. What clashed that autumn was not simply East versus West, but two visions of humanity itself. And behind every pass and slapshot, an entire nation watched to see which vision would endure. The first puck dropped in Montreal, and with it, the myth of invincibility began to crack. Team Canada, filled with NHL superstars, expected domination. But the Soviets played with an almost alien precision. Swift, synchronized, unrelenting. In the first game, Canada led early, then watched in disbelief as the USSR dismantled their rhythm, skating circles around legends they had once considered untouchable. The final score, 7-3 for the Soviets, felt like a national embarrassment. Newspapers the next morning read like obituaries. Commentators called it a humiliation. How could the birthplace of hockey be defeated by unknown amateurs trained behind the Iron Curtain? But those who truly understood the game saw something else, a mirror held up to Canadian pride. The world had changed, and so had the game. In Toronto, Winnipeg, and Vancouver, the next matches turned into redemption quests. The Canadians began to adjust, shedding arrogance for adaptability. Players like Phil Esposito and Bobby Clarke embodied a new spirit, raw, desperate, human. They realized they weren't just fighting another team, they were fighting to rediscover who they were. Then came Moscow. The players entered Soviet ice arenas under portraits of Lenin, under the surveillance of soldiers and silence. Thousands of Canadian fans had travelled across the world, draped in flags, their cheers echoing against cold concrete walls. Every goal in those final games felt heavier than victory itself. It was defiance made visible. The series turned brutal, beautiful, mythic. Canada clawed its way back, tying the series 3-3 with one game drawn. The stage was set for the final confrontation, the eighth and last match. It was more than sport now. It was art, survival, ideology, and emotion condensed into 60 minutes of human will. Every bruise, every drop of sweat carried the weight of a nation that refused to bow. And as the decisive game approached, Canada held its breath once more, knowing the next goal could define a generation. September 28, 1972. Moscow's Luzhniki Palace of Sports trembled with tension. The eighth and final game had become more than a decider. It was destiny waiting to be written. The series was tied, and every heartbeat on both sides of the ocean seemed synchronized with the puck. The Soviet crowd was disciplined and distant, their red flags unmoving. In Canada, offices halted, children watched from classrooms, strangers gathered around televisions as if before an altar. Every second of that match carried the weight of national identity. The score stood even, and the clock mercilessly slipped toward its end. Then, with less than a minute to play, Paul Henderson, exhausted, bruised, and driven by something beyond logic, jumped onto the ice. He called for the puck once, twice, and in a blur of instinct, dove forward. The shot wasn't elegant, it wasn't perfect, but it found the net. For a moment there was silence, the kind of silence that exists before history breathes. Then came the roar. The Canadian bench erupted, players leaping into each other's arms. Across the ocean, living rooms and schools exploded in tears, shouts, disbelief, joy. That goal became a heartbeat frozen in time. It wasn't only about winning, it was about proving that heart could triumph over machinery, that spirit could outlast systems. Paul Henderson's shot was more than a goal. It was the moment a country discovered its reflection on the ice and saw courage staring back. When the final buzzer sounded, the noise of triumph rolled through the nation like thunder. From St. John's to Vancouver, people hugged strangers in the streets, horns blared, and radios played the replay again and again. Paul Henderson's name was whispered like a prayer. For one brief moment, Canada was not a collection of provinces. It was a single voice echoing across frozen land and living rooms alike. But when the cheers faded, something quieter began to unfold. Reflection. The victory had not come easily. It was carved through humility, adaptation, and rediscovery. Canada realized that its pride had nearly been its undoing. The Soviets had shown that structure could match talent, that preparation could challenge instinct. In learning to fight back, Canadians rediscovered the raw beauty of their own resilience. The players returned home to heroes' welcomes, but they were changed men. They had looked into the mirror of defeat and found unity in struggle. For weeks, newspapers spoke not just of scores, but of identity. What did it mean to be Canadian now? Not merely polite, not quietly modest, but strong, creative, unbreakable. The Summit series became a myth retold around dinner tables and in classrooms. It wasn't just about hockey anymore, it was about transformation. The country had faced the unknown and found itself in the process. The ice had melted, but the feeling remained, the knowledge that together Canadians could stand against anything. The 1972 Summit Series was never only about hockey. It was a mirror through which Canada saw itself grow up. Until then, the nation had often defined its identity through others, through Britain's heritage or America's shadow. But that autumn in Moscow, something shifted. The country proved that its greatness did not depend on power or empire, but on heart, grit, and imagination. The Summit Series revealed a national psychology. Canadians found dignity in their imperfection and strength in their resilience. It taught that identity could be forged not from victory alone, but from struggle and humility. Decades later, Henderson's goal still lives in memory because it represents something timeless, a moment when ordinary people believed in extraordinary possibility. It became a shared myth, a cultural heartbeat that still binds generations together whenever the ice glows and the anthem rises. The 1972 series was not just Canada winning a game, it was Canada becoming itself. Half a century later, the echo of that final goal still drifts across the Canadian winter. It reminds a restless nation that unity is born in moments of shared breath. The ice may melt, heroes may fade, but the spirit of 1972 endures, not as history, but as heartbeat.